I'll bother you. It was more than 20 years ago, when we were living in a rented house in Kanagawa Prefecture with our family of 3. At the time, my husband and I were both working, and we had divided our responsibilities so that my husband would take our daughter to nursery school and I would pick her up. That day, I finished work at around 5 p.m., went to pick up our daughter, did some shopping at a nearby supermarket, and then returned home. As usual, I unlocked the door, entered the house, told my daughter to rinse her mouth and wash her hands, and then headed to the kitchen to put the groceries in the refrigerator. There, I found an unknown man hanging from the ceiling, dead. In our dining room, a stranger was hanging limply from the ceiling, dead. As if time had stopped, I froze completely. Unlike in movies or dramas, I didn't scream or panic. I just stood there silently, staring at the lifeless body of the man hanging limply. The scene before me was so unreal that I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't grasp the situation at all, and my mind was flooded with question marks. My thoughts and movements came to a complete standstill, and I froze. Directly beneath the hanging corpse was a pool of excrement, and the room was filled with a terrible stench, like that of a public toilet. Suddenly, I noticed a note on the table. It said, "I'll bother you." Next to it were several tools typically used for DIY projects, suggesting that the man had deliberately installed a hook in the dining room ceiling to hang himself. There were 3 stakes driven into the floor to secure the rope. 2 large stakes and 1 small stake. Those 3 stakes somehow reminded me of my family, and I couldn't help but let out a no. Finally able to move, I endured the nausea that was overwhelming me, threw all my belongings on the floor, rushed to the sink, picked up my daughter who was in the middle of gargling, and immediately ran out of the house. I explained the situation to our neighbor, who let us into their home, borrowed their phone to call the police, and then immediately contacted my husband's workplace. Within 10 minutes, several police cars arrived. After that, my husband hurried home after receiving a call from me, and we were questioned by the police, but neither my husband nor I had ever met that man before. His identity was immediately confirmed because he had his driver's license with him. According to the police, he was a 20-something dental hygienist living in Niigata Prefecture, and his parents had reported him missing a few days earlier. They said they didn't know how he entered our home or why he chose to commit suicide there. However, I had a hunch about why he chose our home as the place to die. I had no prior knowledge of him, and I don't know why he decided to take his own life, but I did have a theory about why he chose our home as the place to die. It was an incident that occurred several weeks before the incident, on a certain evening. My husband was looking at the landline phone bill and said, "Mom, this month's phone bill is way too high. Don't talk on the phone for so long." I didn't remember doing that, and even if I did talk to someone on the phone, I used my cell phone, PHS, so I hardly ever used the home phone. So I asked, I didn't make any long calls. "How much is the phone bill?" 6,000 yen. That's what he said. The usual phone bill was around 3,000 yen, so 6,000 yen was definitely too high. At that time, I thought that my 5-year-old daughter might have made a prank call while we weren't looking, so I questioned her about it, but she insisted, I didn't do anything like that. In the end, the matter was left unresolved. A few days later, I was working the late shift and was home alone until afternoon. Around 10 a.m., while I was reading in the bedroom, the home phone rang. I went to the living room and answered the phone. The caller sounded like an elderly woman. She said to me right away, "Well, I've decided to die after all." Thinking I might have misheard her, I asked, "Excuse me? What did you say?" Then she said clearly, "So, I've decided to die after all." At that moment, I thought it might be a bad joke or a wrong number, so I asked, "Excuse me, but did you dial the wrong number?" She replied, "What? Isn't this times 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 times, times times is times 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 times?" And gave me our home phone number. Apparently, it wasn't a wrong number after all. The woman then asked, "Are you perhaps a family member of that person? Is that person at home?" "That person? Are you referring to my husband?" "Your husband? No, that's not who I'm talking about. I don't know your husband. I'm referring to that kind old lady. Would you mind putting me through to her, please?" "Grandmother? Who is that?" "Well, I didn't ask for your name." "Excuse me, but I think this is a wrong number. We don't have any grandmothers in our family." "That can't be. You called me from your house." "What? You mean my grandmother called you from our house?" "Yes. Our phone has caller ID, so the number that called is displayed. It's definitely your number. The old lady definitely called from your house." With all the incoherent things she was saying, the conversation wasn't going anywhere, so honestly, I could have hung up the phone right there, but out of curiosity, I asked, "What kind of conversation did you and your grandmother have?" Then she replied, "The old lady said to me, 'If you're going to die, come to my house. If you're going to die, die at my house. My house is the gateway to heaven, so if you die at my house, you will surely be led to heaven. So if you're going to die, die at my house and go to heaven.'" That's what she said. At that time, I was considering suicide, and just then, I received a call from her house, and she told me that story. I was really surprised and thought that this old woman must have some kind of mysterious power and that she had called me to guide me to heaven. After thinking about it carefully, I decided that I had reached my limit and that it was time to end it all. So I called back to ask for your address again. If I'm going to die anyway, I want to go to heaven. Ah. I can hear the old woman's voice. She's still there. Please put her on the phone. I hung up the phone. I was so scared and felt so sick that I had dizziness and chills. After hanging up the phone, I stood there for a while, unable to turn around. If, by any chance, I turned around and saw someone, or rather, something there, I thought I would surely lose my mind if I saw it. I had never felt a presence or a gaze from behind, but there was a primal certainty that I must never turn around now. So I never turned around until that certainty faded into a vague unease. However, this finally explained why last month's phone bill was so high. While our family was away, some unknown something was making calls from our house to other places. And it was encouraging people to commit suicide at our house. When I found out about it from that woman's phone call, I was truly terrified of this house, and that night, I confessed to my husband that I wanted to move out immediately, but he said, "No matter how you look at it, it's definitely just a nasty prank call." If there really were an old woman's ghost, it wouldn't be unusual for 1 or 2 paranormal phenomena to occur, but we've lived here for 3 years and nothing like that has ever happened, has it? Mom, you've been completely taken in. You're really naive. He didn't take me seriously. However, on that day, when my husband witnessed the scene of the man who had committed suicide in our home being placed in a body bag and carried out, he finally understood that there was something in our home. That this something was inviting people who wanted to die into our home. Finally, he understood. What I mentioned earlier was exactly this. I'm sure that man also received the same phone call saying, "If you die in our house, you will go to heaven." I am still convinced of that. I reported this to the police, but they dismissed it with a simple, "That's a strange story." That day, I stayed at a nearby hotel, and the next morning, I packed my belongings and moved to my husband's parents' house. I had intended to stay there only until I found another place to live, but my father-in-law and mother-in-law were such kind people, and my daughter became so attached to them that, one thing leading to another, I have continued to live with my in-laws to this day. The reason why I decided to post this story from over 20 years ago is because I recently learned about a website called Oshima Teru on TV. Oshima Teru is a website where you can search for accident-related properties, and while watching the program, I suddenly remembered the house I used to live in, so I decided to look it up out of curiosity. When I did, I found that my former home had a flame mark indicating it was an accident-related property, along with this comment. In 2000, a man in his 20s hanged himself. In 2002, a man in his 50s hanged himself. In 2004, a couple in their 40s committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning in their bathroom. In 2006, a woman in her 30s set herself on fire in her yard. In 2009, a man in his 30s hanged himself. In 2013, a woman in her 50s hanged himself. In 2019, a man in his 30s and a woman in her 20s committed suicide by poisoning. In 2023, a man in his 60s hanged himself. In 2025, a woman in her 30s hanged herself. A total of 11 people have committed suicide. All of them were strangers to the residents. It's just an ordinary house, but it's become a place famous for suicides. After reading this comment, I couldn't stop shaking for a while. Knowing that whatever lives in the house has continued to invite people with weak minds into their homes ever since, and still does, made my hair stand on end. I wanted someone to know about this terrifying experience, and I wanted to share it with someone, so I posted it here. That concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.